Okay, welcome everyone. We've been looking at the nuts and bolts of evangelism, kind of on and off, hit and miss. And we have 3 more straight weeks we're going to do on Tuesday afternoons. And then the week after that, which is the middle week in November, I've got a meeting in Folsom. And so I'm going to have to delay yet another week. But I think beyond that, we're good to go through the beginning of December. The only question I have is whether we do Thanksgiving week, Thanksgiving Tuesday before Thanksgiving or not. And I think we probably will go ahead and do that one. I believe both Talon and Reagan are in town. And so we will probably go ahead with that. So we've been looking at the nuts and bolts of offering invitations, structuring evangelistic efforts, working with a congregation. How do you train your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ to do this work? And now we're finally going to go beyond that and look at actual content that I recommend to teach. In the next several weeks, we're going to look at Ecclesiastes on the front end. Many of you know this lesson, but I'm going to look at it from the angle of how to teach it to somebody else. We're going to look at using one of the Gospels to build faith in people and what's required in the faith building process. We'll look at how to close the deal and how to emphasize what the gospel is to lost souls in a way that will resonate with their hearts and enable them to plug into the idea and fully comprehend it. And so that's the next several weeks. We'll be looking at content issues. I'm going to tell you something that Harold Comer told me one time, a long time ago, that success in evangelism is not curriculum specific. And so you can use a lot of different approaches as long as you're teaching the truth. It is curriculum specific when you're dealing with the Bible as the textbook and the gospel of Jesus Christ, the New Testament in particular. But there are many approaches within the framework of the New Testament that one can use in converting lost souls to Christ. I have honed a particular approach, and it's been good for me. I've had a lot of success with it. And so I'm going to recommend certain fundamental ideas in going forward in how to lay out the plan from point A to point B to point C and so on. And you don't have to do it this way. There are a lot of different approaches, a lot of different methodologies in teaching people, and many good ones that pull a lot of scripture together and so on. The reason that I've used the approach that I use is because when I was a young preacher, I saw that we were becoming more secular, less biblical oriented, and that, as Homer Haley once said, people in our society don't know whether Jesus was crucified on Calvary or drowned swimming across Galilee. They don't have the foggiest clue about who Jesus was or is. And so the evangelistic process, in many respects, in fact, with most people here in the Silicon Valley, is introducing them to Jesus of Nazareth and his program, his plan. And they're absolutely clueless about that for the most part with the people that we are successful converting right here. And so we have to introduce them to the Bible, introduce them to Jesus, introduce them to God, and work back several notches and go very slowly in establishing foundational premise, a basis for their faith, and gradually plant the seeds that will grow their faith. And so, way back when, in looking for something other than a program that assumed a shared heritage of respect for biblical authority, I stumbled across the idea of using Luke Acts or one of the Gospels and Acts as a basis for building the faith and telling people what to do with their faith. um, closing the deal, so to speak, with cases of conversion in Acts. And I was looking for something that I could use on the front end of that process just to bait my hook and reel them in. And I stumbled across Ecclesiastes because the book is so universal. It doesn't require a biblical literacy to understand the basic things that are taught in Ecclesiastes. It's very universal. It's not so much something that is cultural specific or Israelite specific, even though I personally believe Solomon wrote it. There are those who believe that another author wrote it through the eyes of Solomon. I'm not going to debate that point today, but you're definitely from chapter 1 on viewing the world through Solomon's eyes. And I developed a little program using some verses in chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 12. And this was probably late 1980s, early 1990s. And so I have used this probably for at least 30 years. And I've been extremely successful with it. Now, I don't like to toot my own horn. I don't like to brag or to boast about anything that I do for the Lord. I have feet of clay and make a lot of mistakes. But if I could emphasize one thing that you ought to really take note of, it would be this lesson. And if I could jump up and scream, you need to pay attention to what I'm about to say, because this is an extremely effective approach to reeling others into the process and creating this burning interest in learning more about Jesus. And I don't know how to say that strongly enough, so I'm just going to leave it there and hope that you are plugging into what I'm saying there. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint. Using Ecclesiastes in evangelism, baiting the hook. And right off the bat, I'll say that part of handling accurately the word of truth, 2 Timothy 2:15, is knowing how to use the sword of the Spirit to penetrate the deep recesses where soul and spirit are divided, joints and marrow meet, and the thoughts and intentions of the heart are discerned, so that all things are laid bare before the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Hebrews 4:12 and 13. Google, a very popular company in this part of the country, uh, has diversified in recent years, but when they got started, they had 10 core principles, and principle number 2 was it's best to do one thing really, really well. They quickly passed up Yahoo on the search engine popularity charts because they did one thing really, really well. What I think we fall victim to in doing evangelistic work is we try to do 10 things and we don't do any of them very well. But if you do one thing really well, and if you teach this lesson really well, you're going to have some evangelistic success because you're going to create that interest and burning desire for people to learn more. I'm going to share some things with you, some peripheral things just to be aware of when you're teaching Ecclesiastes. These won't necessarily come up when you teach a lost sinner. Not many sermons get preached on Ecclesiastes, Philip Yancey says, for it is one of the Bible's most confusing books. Many conservative Christians treat it with polite distaste as if it had sneaked into the canon when no one was looking. I have a much higher view of Ecclesiastes, and you do as well. And I preach and teach quite often on it, I think. But that said, it's one of the Bible's most neglected books for sure. And it is confusing because people don't understand exactly how the book is communicated. And again, this is not necessarily something I go over when I teach this to non-Christians. But one of the things that makes Ecclesiastes a bit confusing is it's part of the poetic and wisdom literature of the Old Testament. And because it's a poetic book, we have to read it as poetry and not as prose. Leland Ryken calls it protest literature. We usually refer to it as wisdom literature or poetic literature of the Old Testament. Philip Yancey calls Solomon the first existentialist. And there are similarities to the Hebrew or the Hindu Bhagavad Gita. There are cyclical patterns in the Gita, cycles of life that repeat themselves indefinitely. And you have cycles in Ecclesiastes, although the difference is in Ecclesiastes, the cycles come to an end, and there is a culmination point in chapter 12, whereas in the Gita, the cycles continue on indefinitely. I think, again, one of the reasons Ecclesiastes is so confusing to people is because it invites us to take part in a journey of experience. You've heard the old saying that it's not the destination, it's the journey. In a real sense, you want to get to that destination of chapter 12, 13, and 14, but Ecclesiastes is like getting into a vehicle that will take you on a journey in which you're going to be investigating. There's a grand search for meaning and purpose in life. And unlike many books in the Bible that are deductively reasoned, where you've got a main point, maybe a subpoint, another subpoint, and a conclusion or whatever, you have an inductively reasoned book in Ecclesiastes through firsthand observation. It's like the old game show, Let's Make a Deal. Is the answer to the grand prize behind door number 1? No. How about door number 2? No. How about door number 3? No. And through a process of elimination, you have wisdom coming largely through observation, God permitting Solomon and through him us as well, to see from an experiential standpoint that the historic pursuits of mankind are nothing but dead-end streets. And in that sense, Ecclesiastes is a negative preparation for the gospel. Is the answer to human meaning and purpose and happiness money? No. How about long life? No. How about the biggest mansion? No. How about having the most kids? No. How about having the most wives or the most husbands? No. And the things that people think will bring them happiness don't satisfy their deepest need. There's still a hole. And Ecclesiastes forces that issue. It creates an awareness that that void is deep in the human heart. And again, one of the things I think, because it's argued inductively and not deductively, that we're on a journey of experience, there are these oscillations of thought, which is an invitation to experience the process. You have at the end of chapter 1 already and into chapter 2, life is good. No, life is bad. No, life is good. No, life is bad. And you flip-flop back and forth from paragraph to paragraph. Life under the sun is a good thing because you're blessed by God and he showers you with gifts. No, life under the sun is a curse. It's vanity. It's a striving after wind. Well, which is it? Either the author has a kind of a schizophrenia, or the conclusion has not been reached yet, and there's a tension that is still in development until you reach the end. 15 negative sections, 13 positive, 3 mixed. Life is bad, life is good, life is bad, life is good. And this is what confuses people, Because the author with the drive of a type A personality is forging ahead, trying to figure it out, but he hasn't got it figured out until he gets to the end. And so if you can read Ecclesiastes with a degree of suspension until you get to the end, then you're okay. You can live with a degree of contradiction and tension until you reach that only logical conclusion hinted at throughout. The only thing that has not evaporated with the wind at the end of the book. And through a process of elimination, it's like checking off all the boxes or crossing out all of the alternatives until the only thing left still standing is fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. Okay, I usually don't cover all that on when I'm studying this with non-Christians, but I think it's important if you're going to teach this to understand all of these points. What I read is chapter 1, 1 through 11, chapter 2, 1 through 11, and chapter 12, basically. And so let me get a volunteer for chapter 1, 1 through 11.
I can read it.
Okay.
There we go. All right, chapter 1, verse 1 through 11. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south, and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run into the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after.
Okay. In teaching this material, I want you to remember about three things. Number one, sit down and have the person that you're studying with read each of these paragraphs. It's really important for that person to get the nose in the text. And then when he's done or she's done reading the paragraph, you're going to make a few comments to reinforce some basic points. Number two, you want to make this as interactive as possible. The way you make it interactive is you ask questions. What is he saying here? What does that mean? What do you have any idea of what is being said there? And have a lot of give and take as much as possible with the person that you're studying with. The third thing that I think that you need to do as a teacher is throw in a practical real life illustration once in a while to drive the point home. And I'm going to give you a few illustrations that I've used over the years with some success, and I've done this so many hundreds of times. In fact, have taught it to probably hundreds of churches, at least scores and scores and scores of churches. And in fact, even though I don't know how to speak German very well, Andrea once wrote out this sermon in German for me, and we went over it again and again and again until I pronounced almost every word perfectly. And when I preached it, I still botched one or two words big time. But we were in Eastern Germany where Andrea has a friend, and they have a little house church there. And so I preached this in German, and Andrea's friend brought a girlfriend with her to church that morning. It was the first time she had been to church with them. And she was baptized a couple of weeks later, and she's still a faithful Christian there. And it warms my heart when I can do just a little tiny something, even in German, with this lesson. And it can do some lasting good and make a small dent in someone's faith. I wasn't responsible for her conversion, but I've taught this all over this country and in other places around the world, and everybody can relate to it. And so um, I'm going to give you an illustration I've used many times just to kind of set the table. Remarkable thing happened in Fremont, California several years ago. A 17-year-old girl named Karen Ching achieved a perfect score on both sections of the SAT test and a perfect 8,000 on the Tough University of California Acceptance Index. No one in history had ever gotten a perfect score on both of those tests in the same year prior to her. She was a straight A student at Mission San Jose High School in Fremont. And so the world has been blessed with a brilliant, one-of-a-kind young lady who is probably well on her way to a successful law career by now. She was intending to go into law. But the national news story about Karen included a brief but significant exchange with a reporter when he asked her, "What is the meaning of life?" She replied, "I have no idea. I wish I knew myself." And so here's a brilliant, one-of-a-kind young lady who has, or had at the time, absolutely no clue why she was here. That's your neighbor, your family member, the person sitting in the cubicle next to you at work, the person that you play basketball with down at the gym. You know, well, it's a whole lot of people in the Silicon Valley. I'll give you another illustration I use often, and that is Francis Crick, together with James Watson, discovered the structure of DNA in 1953. Toward the end of that great scientist's life in 1994, he wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis, The Scientific Search for the Soul. In that book, he argues you, your joy, and your sorrows, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. That's a humble claim for a man to make in a book. Intuitively, we know that there is more to us than that. That we are not just an assemblage of nerve cells and their associated molecules. But Ecclesiastes forces the issue. And the writer of Ecclesiastes does so right off the bat by saying vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's from a Hebrew word meaning vapor, vapor of vapors. That there's nothing solid to which to attach yourself, and all is vanity. What does man gain? Verse 3, by all the toil at which he toils under the sun. Another way of asking that question is, what do we hope to accomplish? When all is said and done and we've lived our lives, what will we have accomplished in life? Or another way of asking that is, why are we here? What's our purpose in life? And then he goes on to say, he gives three illustrations from nature: the rising and the setting of the sun, verse 5, the swirling of the wind, verse 6, and the evaporation cycle, verse 7. And whether you're talking about the rising and setting of the sun, the swirling of the wind, or the evaporation cycle, things tend to go in cycles. You can add to that the beating of a heart, the seasons of the year, how many trips you've made around the sun in terms of birthdays. We could talk about the cycles of the moon, but everything we can talk about inhalation and respiration. Virtually everything that we do runs in cycles. Life is like that. It goes in cycles. But on a grander scale, if you look at life as one giant cycle, then you go around in circular motion like a runner on a racetrack, but are you really getting anywhere? If you're a hamster in a cage and you run that circular machine in the cage and you're just running stationary, like, are you really getting anywhere? Or are you simply in the rat race of life? Another illustration I give, everybody can relate to it. You wake up in the morning, you eat breakfast, you take a shower, you fight traffic, you go to work, you go home, you put your head on a pillow at night to do what? To do the same old thing the next day, day after that, day after that, day after that. And in the rat race of life, we begin asking ourselves, is there anything more than this? There's got to be something more than this. Or you can put it on a grander scale. You're born, you grow up, you go to school, you get a degree, you get a career, you climb the corporate ladder, you start a family, you grow old, you retire, you die, you pass the torch to the next generation, and what do they do? The same thing that I just outlined. And the generation after that, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. Everybody relates to that because life is cyclical. Is there anything that is really new? Verse 10. What has been done is what will be done, and the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Verses 8, 9, and 10. And technology changes the equation in terms of certain externals of life, but it doesn't really change the basic fundamentals. We're born, we grow up, we die, life is over. Been there, done that. And what really forces this issue is verse 11. There's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. So you have this cyclical nature to life. You could bring chapter 3, verses 1 through 11 in as an illustration, where in the 1960s, the Byrds, the singing group, the Byrds made famous the song "There Is a Season, Turn, Turn, Turn." It's an oldie, and I'm showing my age by alluding to it. But those words are right out of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And even though there is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, ultimately, verse 11, God has made everything beautiful in his time. He has also put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So even though life goes in cycles, we live a few years, we breathe a few breaths, we die, and life goes on without us. And we never figure out anything beyond certain basic fundamentals that we have the time, the wherewithal, and the resources to investigate while we're here. So verse 11, there's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. The question that I ask people that I study this with is, do you know who your great, 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 great grandparents were? And almost nobody does. Occasionally there's a genealogy buff. And then I follow it up with, well, why don't you know who they were? Were they totally unimportant in their time? And if people are honest, what they say is essentially, I'm living my life now. That was then, this is now. And I don't have an interest in those who come before me. That's the honest answer. I'm too busy to figure out those kinds of things. They're irrelevant to the life that I'm living right now. Okay, fair enough. What are the chances, should time go on, that your great grandchildren will have any clue who you were? And you follow it up with that question. You ask those two questions at verse 11. Do you know who they were? And what are the chances that your grandkids will know who you were? You follow it up with that question. And they'll get the point. If your great grandparents went through these cycles and they're gone and they're dead and you don't even remember their names, what are the chances that your great grandchildren will remember you, your posterity? And if they don't even remember who you were, then that forces the question back in verse 3, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Why then are we here? If all we do is go through a few cycles of monotony only to die and be forgotten by posterity, why are we here? What do we hope to accomplish? Everybody understands that. Everybody can relate to that. Are we going through a meaningless exercise, or are we hoping to accomplish something? Questions or comments on chapter 1? I don't try to teach everything there is to teach about Ecclesiastes 1. I simply want to make a few fundamental important points that have to do with the futility of going through the motions in automatic pilot as if this is a monotonous existence. Then I go to chapter 2. Reagan, would you read verses 1 through 11?
Sure. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly, until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted gardens for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had home-born slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun.
Okay. After this chapter is read, verses 1 through 11, I make these points. With the drive of a type A personality, the author tries to break the endless cycle of monotony by embarking on a grand search for happiness. He has it all: fame, power, money, women, wealth, splendor. You could tell a little bit about the story of Solomon to give a background information for those who don't know. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines. He wrote 3,000 proverbs, 1,005 songs. The Queen of Sheba comes, she says the half has not been told. We speak of Solomonic architecture to this day, the Solomonic gates of Gezer. And so here's a man who spent years constructing what would have been considered one of the wonders of the ancient world, the temple in Jerusalem, spent almost twice as long building his own palace. So unfortunately, his frame of reference is rather selfish. You look at verses 4 through 8, it's me, myself, and I. A lot of personal reflexive pronouns. It's me, myself, and I. It's all about him. But here's the leading question that I ask when we're done reading the paragraph. If I only had blank, then I'd be happy. What's the number one answer? If you were taking a survey through the neighborhood, what would be the number one answer for people in general? And the number one answer is money. If I only had $1 million, then I'd be happy. How about, in the Silicon Valley, that doesn't go very far. How about 10 million? If I only had 10 million, then my life would be complete. Would it? Are all millionaires happy? Howard Hughes said, I would exchange all my money for one happy marriage. Okay, let's take the money away, bring in the wife. Are all married people happy? Well, my life is miserable, but if we had some kids, then I'd have maybe be a family man or a family a mother, and love to have some kids. Okay, bring in some kids. Are all parents happy? Well, those kids are kind of screaming and driving me crazy half the time, and so if we have a bigger house, we'll put the kids on one side of the house and put the master bedroom on the other side, and we'll buy that larger recreational vehicle to transport the kids to soccer, and then we'll be happy. Just get a bigger home. Are all homeowners happy? Well, these payments are killing me. The mortgage out here is just ridiculous, but if I had that better job or that promotion, so I can pay for that sneaking mortgage payment, then I'd be happy. Are all people who climb the corporate ladder happy? Well, this tech company is working me 24/7. They expect all my time, and they want me to be down there all my waking hours. This work is killing me. But I'll tell you what, I'll really be happy when I can finally retire. Are all retired people happy? My body's just falling apart. It ain't what it used to be. And I'm 80 years old and I wish I could be 20 again, and I can't. And the sad truth of it is everybody can relate to the scenario I've just created here, that we go through life chasing blanks. If I only had blank, then I'd be happy. And then when you attain that, then it's another blank and another blank and another blank. And here's what you need to tell people to drive this point home. Solomon had all his blanks filled. He had everything anybody could possibly want of a materialistic nature: fame, power, money, women, prestige, royal authority. There was a man with everything, right? Was he happy? He says in verse 11, "Then I considered all that my hands had done and all the toil that I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun." Evidently, none of these pursuits brought lasting fulfillment to Solomon. Everything was vanity and a striving after wind. Deep down, everybody knows, even biblically illiterate atheists and agnostic, they know that this kind of stuff doesn't bring happiness, that we need something more fundamental that harkens to the purpose for which we were put here. And although atheists won't word it like that, there is a profound emptiness in virtually every one of them. Which leads us to chapter 12. And let me get a volunteer for chapter 11, verses 7 through 10, to kind of set the stage for chapter 12.
I can read again.
Okay.
That was 11, 7 through 10.
Uh-huh.
See. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in the youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart, and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity.
Okay. As the tension continues, you have negative sections and positive sections. This is a positive one. Rejoice in this life that God has given you, O young man. Rejoice in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. Go ahead and chase your dreams. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Go ahead and enjoy this life that God has given you, but realize that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. It's okay to be young and to chase your dreams, but realize that God will hold you accountable for everything that you do. So remove vexation from your heart, put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity, because they're temporary. Life is so short, so you better make the most of it while you have it, and realize that God will hold you accountable. With that background in mind, we dive into chapter 12. And Reagan, would you get the first 8 verses of chapter 12?
Sure. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and clouds return after the rain. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble, and mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle, because they are few, and those who look through windows grow dim, and the doors on the street are shut, as the sound of the grinding mill is low, and one will arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place, and of terrors on the road. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags himself along, and the caperberry is ineffective. For man goes to his eternal home, while mourners go about in the street. Remember him before the silver cord is broken, and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity.
Okay. So I usually paint a little bit of a picture in my comments on this to show the metaphors for the aging process. So remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no pleasure in them. There comes a point in your life when you get old and you don't enjoy life so much anymore. I had to stay last week in the home of one of the older brothers in Christ, and he's going downhill fast. This is in the Reno area, and really nice man, very generous, but his body is failing him right now. And I thought of him a lot in connection with this passage. So what I tell people is, I'm going to tell you what I think some of these metaphors are pointing toward, and what they mean, what they symbolize. You can feel free to disagree with me, but the overall picture is fairly easy to see. You have childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. You're going to get old fast, and therefore remember your Creator in the days of your youth before that day comes. It's never too late to serve God, as long as as there's life and breath, and the desire to go with it. But it's a whole lot better if you serve God while you're young and you have your whole life ahead of you and you still have your energy and so on. Remember God before the sun, the light, and the moon, the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. We once lived in Oregon for a couple of years. In one winter, it rains 33 straight days. And you keep thinking, well, the sun's going to come out, and it doesn't. And the sun's going to come out, and it doesn't. And when you get older, you think, okay, I've had a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, and it's going to get better, and it doesn't, and or it may not. At least when you get to a certain point, and I'm gonna feel better tomorrow, and you don't, and I'm gonna get my energy back, and it doesn't happen. And it's amazing. You breathe a few breaths while you're young, and the years pass by, and you wonder as you look in the mirror at that older person that you hardly recognize, where have all the years gone? The clouds are darkened, and the stars are darkened. The clouds return after the rain. Verse 3, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, you've got Parkinson's disease or other infirmities and the trembling of the limbs. You have those who look through the windows are dimmed. The eyes don't work like they used to. The doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low. You have during the days of the grinding mill, it's harvest season, and you have a lot of hustle and bustle and festivities, harvest festivals, and everybody who is anybody is there, and they're working the harvest, and they're grinding the flour and threshing the grain. It's except for older people who are not part of the activity or the festivity. And one rises at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. You have older people that might be easily startled and then cannot hear as well or don't enjoy the festivities like they used to anyway. They are afraid of also of what is high or high place, and also terrors are on the way. Don't want to drive at night, don't want to take a vacation, don't want to take a long journey. It's just too much work. I just want to stay home. Have you ever heard an older person say anything like that? I have, certainly, and it's resembling my own body more and more, to tell you the truth. Let's see, the almond tree blossoms. What color? Almond trees turn white. They blossom white, and your hair turns gray. The grasshopper drags itself along. It no longer has the hop and the pep and the energy it used to have. Desire fails, or as Reagan's translation says, the caperberry is ineffective. The caperberry was an aphrodisiac, and there comes a point in time at which you can't even put an external additive into the human body to get the parts working again, because the parts just don't work like they used to. And that's just a fact of life as we get older. And so desire fails. It's literally a sexual desire, or primarily sexual desire, because man is going to his eternal home and the mourners go about in the streets. That's a funeral scene. Verse 6, before the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. In other words, you might have a gold-plated piece of pottery in ancient Israel. Someone knocks it over, or rips it away from the cord that ties it to the anchor point, and the whole thing shatters into 1,000 pieces, and you can't say, well, no problem, I'll glue them all back together, good as new, right? No, it doesn't work like that. Nor can you turn back the clock when you're 80 years old and be 20 again. Because once this time has passed and the prime of life and youth, which are fleeting, are gone, you can never recapture them in this life. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. You're going to get old fast, and it's going to be, it seems like it accelerates, that the time just goes by faster and faster and faster, and exponentially as you get older. When I was young, it seemed like a year took forever. When I'm older, it seems like a year is nothing more than a month or two. But it's strange how that works out. And the compelling conclusion, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every hidden thing or secret thing, whether good or evil. So, the compelling conclusion is that life is a probationary period for a day of reckoning beyond which we will be rewarded or punished. We all have a day in court with the Almighty, and the God who grants us life and breath and all things has invested our lives with infinite purpose and meaning. Whether or not we take advantage of the opportunity is of vital importance. So in this probationary period, the test is in progress. Right now, as we speak, how are we behaving ourselves? Are we fearing God and keeping his commandments? Because this is the whole duty of man. But it's really a negative preparation for the gospel, because in all of this we have failed miserably and need a Savior. Have we feared God and kept his commandments brilliantly, or have we tripped up all over ourselves in that life mission? If we're honest, we are sinners in need of mercy. So what Ecclesiastes does is it prepares the way for Jesus. And I always follow this with, if you feel an inadequacy with how well you have achieved this life mission that God has assigned to you, then there's good news in Jesus Christ of Nazareth. But there's one more point that I go to, and this is an illustration, and Reagan and Talon, I want you to pay really careful attention to this. What I tell people when I get to this point, particularly atheists and agnostics, is that a very famous agnostic taught me how to read chapter 12, 13, and 14. Not a Bible believer. Carl Sagan, famous scientist, he's dead now. He wrote a book years ago called The Cosmos. And the first sentence of that book is, the cosmos is all that is or was or ever will be. I prefer the first sentence of another book, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Toward the end of his life, he wrote another book called Pale Blue Dot. It was about the Voyager 2 spacecraft that was projected into space, and it's even made news here recently because scientists have lost control of it finally, as it's gone to the outer reaches of our solar system. And as that spacecraft was sent into space, it would get farther and farther away from Earth and then take pictures and send them back to Earth. And the farther it got, the smaller Earth became, until Earth was nothing but a pale blue dot, hence the title of the book. On the first few pages of that book, Mr. Sagan says, we think that what we're doing is really important in this life. But really it's not. We are nothing but ant-like creatures on a pale blue dot in a vast ocean of a universe that is so gigantic that we can't even get our minds around how big it is. And there is no one out there, he said, to save us from ourselves. It was when I confronted those words and thought about them that I finally understood what Solomon was saying 3,000 years ago. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or evil. And this is the question that I ask people. And I want you to write down this question, Talon and Reagan at least. Can our lives be invested with purpose and meaning, with eternal dimensions in the absence of accountability? If you take God out of the equation, and therefore Judgment Day out of the equation, then Mr. Sagan is right. We think that what we're doing is really important, but it's really not. And there's no one out there to save us from ourselves. But if you put God back into the equation, and you put Judgment Day back into the equation, then he's wrong. And our lives are of infinite worth and value. And this life is a probationary period waiting a day of judgment, a day in court with God, beyond which we will be rewarded or punished for eternity. So, what that view of life does is it makes every moment count. And everything that we're doing is of infinite worth and value because we're playing for keeps and eternity hangs in the balance. But you cannot have your cake and eat it too. If you take God out of the equation and Judgment Day out of the equation, then Mr. Sagan's view of the world is right. That we are nothing but ant-like creatures on a pale blue dot and there's no one to save us. And we're not worth very much. And we have no meaning of life in life and no purpose in life. But you cannot have your cake and eat it too. You either subscribe to the atheistic model in which there is no God, but our worth and value are rather slim, or you subscribe to the theistic view in which there is a God and our worth and value are infinite. But there are implications on both sides of that divide. But you can't have purpose and meaning and infinite value without God and without Judgment Day. As much as we may rebel against the idea that I have to face God in judgment, we need that to reaffirm our worth and value. And that's the conclusion that Solomon ends up with. And I taught this for years and years without really coming to terms with that concept addressed in that question until I read Mr. Sagan's point. And then it hit me over the head that all these temporal things that Solomon has chased are X'd out of the equation. They're eliminated because they don't provide that meaning that fills our empty hole. But when we confront God, to fear God and keep his commandments with the view to facing him in judgment one day, then all of a sudden everything comes together. And that's the only thing that Solomon comes up with after everything is investigated that will give him worth and value in the end. And I would suggest to you, the more secular our culture becomes, the more relevant this approach on the front end of your evangelistic efforts, this becomes. That Ecclesiastes is an invaluable tool to force people to think about transcendent realities, as well as their own worth and value in what may seem to them a purposeless universe. And so I highly recommend baiting your hook on the front end with a lesson like this that will reel them in, create an interest, show them that the Bible is a whole lot more multi-layered book than they think it is, full of deep meaning, and question how they can fill that mission of fearing God and keeping his commandments with sin in their lives by needing to learn more about Jesus. And so, again, I've studied this with hundreds of people with success almost every single time in bringing them back for more. Haven't baptized everybody, obviously, but it's a very effective tool in reeling people into the process and creating a burning interest for studying the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay, questions or comments? Our time is about at an end, but any final comments?
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, you're welcome, Rochelle.
Please send the recording anyways, since even though I was on.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you all next week. Take care.
Thank you, Mike.